Hello Internet, Taliesin here, and today we are talking Covenants, the 4 factions that make up the core of the ethereal dead best buddies you will make in new upcoming World of Warcraft expansion Shadowlands, and who you will need to choose between and ultimately pick one of to pledge your allegiance to, a choice that will impact your entire Shadowlands experience in a big way, from the story that you play through to the transmog that you wear, right down to the abilities and talent trees that you have available to you. So who will you pick? Will it be super cool and awesome vampire bitey boys, the Venthyr of Revendreth? Well, yes, obviously it will. I mean, seriously, look at them, but come on, play along. Or will it be the floaty, wispy, leafy, Sylvanian family-looking furries of the Night Fae? How about the teenage edgelord headbangers of Maldraxxus? And that's it. Those are the only choices. Those are the only covenants to choose from, I'm pretty sure. So which one will it be? And more importantly, will you actually have any choice at all? The discussion around covenants, and in particular those abilities and Soulbind talent trees that each covenant will bestow unto players, have been a massive point of contention among the community since it was announced at BlizzCon 2019, and especially again now with the Shadowlands Alpha giving us our first proper look at the specific abilities and numbers involved. Opinions on this topic range from who gives a shit about covenant abilities because I'm just going to be a Venthyr, whatever, because seriously, look at them though, to this system can't possibly work and we should throw it all in the trash right now, just like we should have done with Azerite armor, and everything in between. So in this video, we are going to get stuck into covenants and present to you the 2 extremes of how this system could work out. So join us as we ask, what are the best and worst case scenarios with covenant abilities, and just how do we make them work? Okay, go, 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 go. And yeah, we're going to start with the absolute worst case scenario for covenants, a really quite easy section to write because the potential problems with this system have been glaringly obvious from the very first moment the idea was presented to us. Covenants have massive RP value to players, being a super important choice that their character makes, which from a story perspective can define the whole identity of that player. The covenant you choose decides which zone you're pledging your allegiance to, which perspective you will see the story of the expansion through, which characters you will spend the most time hanging out with, the armor and weapons and awesome back transmogs that you have access to, as well as mounts that you can collect. It's a great chance for players to pick an aesthetic that they really like and enjoy it for the entirety of an expansion. And it's an amazingly effective selling point for Shadowlands too. I don't really know anyone who hasn't already decided which of the covenants is their favorite based on initial looks alone, or what different covenants their different alts will join based on their headcanon character. And from that point of view, covenants are doing exactly what they're supposed to, giving players a mask to nail their colours to and identify with, just like a proper RPG experience should. But of course, an RP and story and aesthetic experience isn't all that covenants offer. They're also intrinsically linked to player power and progression, because each covenant also enables the use of 2 covenant abilities, one standard covenant-wide one and one specific to the player class. And here is obvious problem number 1. What happens when the covenant that you want to join to enjoy the RP, aesthetic and story that you like the most doesn't align with the covenant that gives your class the most useful ability for them to use in-game? And look, we said this is a worst case scenario right here, so let's go the whole hog, and content warning, this is going to get nasty, okay? But imagine, right, if you wanted to join the Venthyr, because of course you do, you're not an idiot, seriously, look at them, but the Kyrion Covenant of Bastion gave your character by far the most OP covenant ability for your class, to the extent that having to join the Boy Scout Smurflords was, to all intents and purposes, mandatory for any kind of high-level content. What if the player choice doesn't come down to which covenant do I love the most and want to be a part of, and is instead, do I want to be in the covenant that I love, or do I want to be good at the game? Many of you grudgingly choose the team with the best ability and eat shiny blue shit for the rest of your expansion. And then there's the question of what happens when one covenant's ability inevitably gets nerfed and another's buffed later on in the expansion when everyone has already made their choices. What happens when the meta changes? Already we're seeing world first players talk about having 4 of each class, 1 in each covenant, to protect against when this definitely happens. And sure, not everyone is in the top 1% of players, but shit, 90% of players think they are, and that is a whole lot of work to make sure you don't get screwed by a shift in the balance of covenant abilities in 9.1, you know? But wait, because I've got another bombshell for you, team, and it's a whole lot less appetizing than being forced to join the space dweebs for all eternity, leaving you dreaming of awesome awesome tombstone back transmogs you can never have. Because actually, although the situation I've just described is what most people are worried about when it comes to covenants, I don't actually think it is the worst case scenario. For me, there's a much worse situation that looks like it could be developing here. One where not only are you forced to pick a covenant that you don't want, but even when you do, the covenant ability that you get means you are limited to only ever feeling really optimized for one specific spec or mode of play. Let me elaborate. Let's say you really want to play Venthyr, because obviously you do, because you have eyes and you've seen how awesome they are. But when Shadowlands rolls along, you try out all of the Covenant abilities and you decide, well, I really like raiding, and Maldraxxus gives me the best single target DPS ability for my class. So that's the one I'll go for. And okay, so being a Necrolord means like I always feel like I'm in a 90s FPS game, but fine. At least I feel like now I'm as good as I can be in raid. Job done. But then what if you realize that Night Fae has the best Covenant ability for Mythic Plus for your class? And then what if you realized that if you ever wanted to switch to your class's tanking spec, actually Bastion is the only real choice? And what if Venthyr has the best PvP ability? Now, not only are you stuck in a Covenant that you wouldn't have chosen otherwise, but you're stuck with an ability that is mandatory for raiding on your class, but a less optimal choice for any other type of gameplay. So you don't even feel like you're playing the game right half the time anyway. This, for me, is the clear worst case scenario, and it's not something a whole lot of people seem to be worried about. I mean, yeah, choosing a Covenant whose aesthetic you don't really vibe with because it's the best ability for your class isn't ideal, sure, but at least you are able to make the choice between aesthetics and gameplay in that scenario. My worry is that the reality will be you'll never be able to feel like you've made a good choice. And we can actually see that already happening in the initial blueprints for Covenant abilities that we've seen so far. The Venthyr mage ability, Mirrors of Torment, is a great example. This is clearly designed to be a PvP talent, and that's great, that's fine, but its uses feel pretty limited outside of that, because guaranteed the slow effects won't work on raid bosses, for example, and the single target nature of it may prove useful in certain circumstances in Mythic Plus, but generally if that's your bag, then there are other Covenants that you'd go with over Venthyr for pushing keys. So if you're a PvP loving mage who naturally gravitated towards choosing Venthyr because of this ability, the danger is that you're going to feel lumbered with a useless trait in any other type of gameplay mode. Or look at Demon Hunters. Their Kyrion ability is very much for use in AoE situations, whereas joining Night Fae is very much a single target focused kind of thing. And of course, if these were just talents, it wouldn't be a problem. You'd swap between them as much as the situation demands, but that's not how Covenants work. And whereas changing Covenant will be possible, it's not going to be something that you can do very much. Blizzard have compared it to resetting your artifact progression. It costs you the equivalent of one progression level to do that in Legion, so it's feasible that you'd lose the same amount of Soulbind progression if you switched Covenants. Basically, you don't really want to do it. And anyway, even if swapping Covenants were easy, it kind of defies the entire point of the system if you're skipping between them at will, doesn't it? Which brings us to how we avoid this worst case scenario. Because I see a lot of people saying, you know, just make all of the Covenant abilities available to players to swap between like talents, no matter which Covenant they actually belong to. Or just make the abilities only work in the open world and not in raids, Mythic Plus or PvP, so they don't really have an impact on player power or playstyle. Or even just scrap the entire idea altogether. It's a nightmare to balance anyway, and Blizzard are bound to mess it up, so why bother? And true enough, any of these things would indeed solve the potential problems with Covenant abilities that we've identified here. But at their heart, the Covenants are a really cool idea. So with Ian's recent insistence that if they really are unable to find a solution to the glaring dangers of Covenant abilities, that he is willing to throw them out entirely before the expansion begins, with that promise from the head honcho as a backup nuclear get out of jail card option always in the background there, surely the best thing overall would be to use the probably quite considerable time that we have in alpha and beta to find a way to solve these potential issues with the system, but still have the concept intact. Because it's fun and interesting and new, and I like it. And in my opinion, it's actually quite easy to avoid anything like the worst case scenario we present here, and actually to realize the Covenant system as Blizzard intended and for it to work. I guess you might call it the best case scenario. So in this section, we're not just going to go over the best possible outcome for Covenants, but how we actually make that happen. So in an ideal world, obviously, you want to be able to choose any Covenant you like. And this is, of course, the easy bit, and as we discussed earlier, it already exists. The Covenants are there, you can choose them. Good. Now, of course, in a best case scenario, the Covenant ability that each team offers you will have absolutely zero influence on which Covenant you choose. Am I right? Yeah, look, okay, you're gonna hate this, right? But I'm not sure I agree. And bear with me on this one, okay? I want to make a choice, and I want that choice to be significant and meaningful from an RP and a gameplay perspective. As a player, I want agency. I want the decisions I make to matter, and there is no agency in a world where every choice leads to the same outcome or conclusion, which is why I don't want to neuter the differences in the Covenant abilities. If I'm playing a priest, I want to see priests in other Covenants using different abilities and thinking, oh wow, that's a really interesting thing they've done right there. And also, I want to show off my own choice. That's cool to me. So yeah, the obvious bar to set here is that yes, players should be able to pick their Covenant based entirely on RP and aesthetics and not feel like they've been dicked by being locked into a limiting or substandard Covenant ability. We all agree with that, I think. But I also think there's that other side to this too. In an ideal scenario, some players should be picking a Covenant based on which ability they will get, because that's a choice they will enjoy making. Both those ways of choosing a Covenant should exist and be valid, and the important thing is, neither should be wrong. So how do we do that? How do we let players choose their Covenant for either of those reasons, but make it so neither choice can be wrong whilst still preserving player agency and giving weight to the decision? Well, the answer, my friends, is the Soulbind system. Soulbinds are kind of a mix between the Netherlight Crucible, Essence slots, and the Artifact tree. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, oh no, Taliesin, back the F up. No, no, no. The last thing we need is more systems on top of systems on top of systems. I saw some other YouTubers saying that was absolutely everything that's wrong with modern WoW, and I totally agree. So whatever you're about to say, it is bad and wrong. And you know what? That's not even an unfair response. But bear in mind, Shadowlands Soulbinds aren't a system on top of another system in the way that the Netherlight Crucible or Essences were. They are not added later to try and give another level of gameplay and progression to an existing thing, or to fix a broken thing. Soulbinds are being developed alongside Covenants and Covenant abilities, and although we don't know everything about them yet, you would hope that in an ideal world that means they will complement and diversify Covenant abilities in a way that frees them of all the potential problems that we've already been over. Okay, I'm confusing you, I can tell. So let's take a step back and look at Soulbinds. Each Covenant has 3 potential buddies that you can Soulbind to, and each buddy gives you a new talent tree, early rough versions of which have been data mined by Wowhead, and there's a link to their Soulbind calculator below so you can play around with these yourself. And for now, let's take a look at the Night Fae. One Soulbind you can choose in this Covenant is the Dreamweaver, and you can see that this Soulbind tree has a mix of set abilities unique to the Dreamweaver that get unlocked by progressing the tree, like an artifact, starting with Field of Poppies, which reduces the attack and cast speed of nearby enemies by 20% when you exit Soul Shape. Soul Shape being the universal Night Fae Covenant ability. What makes it different from the Artifact tree, though, is that whereas eventually you would unlock every slot on that, no matter which path you took, here there is a choice to be made. So you will have to pick between Social Butterfly, which increases versatility to you and your allies, Soothing Voice, which adds a slow after all of your CC effects, or Empowered Chrysalis, which gives a portion of the healing you do or receive back as a shield on the target. 3 quite different effects there, and I imagine you haven't found it very difficult to see which one you choose depending on the role your character plays or the gameplay you take part in. And there's also the empty slots here, which are filled by conduits. We still have no idea where you get conduits, but whether they just be boss drops like with the Netherlight Crucible, or from a wider variety of gameplay sources like Essences, they clearly come in 3 different types: survival, throughput, and utility, allowing you to further push your character into a specific direction. And there being 3 of these Soulbinds, and you being able to swap between your Soulbinds in any rested area, like talents, clearly the way these are intended to work is that if you're a paladin, say, you can have 1 Soulbind build to increase your healing for when you play Holy, 1 specced out for survival that you swap to when you go prot, and 1 built around throughput abilities and conduits for retribution. Or let's say you're a warrior and you picked Venthyr because you're not an idiot, because seriously, look at them. Your Covenant ability, Condemn, is 100% a single target thing, dealing damage and reducing the damage that the target does to you. It's baller, but you are clearly going to be more interested in the damage element when you're Fury or Arms, and the damage reduction when you're tanking as Prot. So you do precisely that. You have a Soulbind tree built specifically to maximize the throughput of Condemn for DPS, and another Soulbind tree built more with survival in mind for tanking, in each case getting the best out of Condemn depending on your role. From a gameplay, but also psychological point of view, that is really important. To be able to feel like your Covenant ability is not dictating to you which spec or role you should play. Now, there are a couple of caveats to this, and this is really a subsection that should be labelled feedback for Blizzard, okay? Are you listening, Blizz? Because this is for you. We've thought about this, and this is feedback right here, just like you asked for. Or fubba fubba boya, lubba patifi, watatat if brulia for short. I just described how being able to build these 3 Soulbinds for different play styles can go a long way towards balancing the potential problems with Covenant abilities, and they absolutely should. So Blizz, you need to make sure that players can actually do that. We don't want obvious throughput abilities only leading to survival conduit slots. We don't want obvious survival abilities only leading towards throughput slots. We want to be able to really make those Soulbinds specialist and focused. And about these conduits, Blizz, because I think I know how you're going to make them work. I've got a feeling that a red throughput conduit is going to just give a flat increase to damage and healing, and they'll come at different levels. So you might get a bog standard lesser one from questing mobs that gives you a 1% increase. Then you might get one in dungeons, which gives you a 2% increase. Heroic raids might give you a red conduit, which gives you a flat 3% increase, and mythic raids a 4% increase. And then the next tier of raids in 9.1 will start pushing into the 5% increase territory. And okay, fine, that's fine, whatever. It's easy to judge, it's easy to balance, it's easy to understand, I get it. But for Soulbinds to really be the answer to the Covenant ability problem, I believe there need to be conduits that interact directly with the Covenant abilities. For me, remember, the absolute worst case scenario for Covenant abilities is that you get limited to only ever being able to optimize for a certain spec or style of play. So for example, what if you're a demon hunter and you're really enjoying your Night Fae ability, the Hunt, because it's awesome for single target and PvP, but every time you go into Mythic Plus, you wish you'd gone with another Covenant because of their much more AoE focused abilities. Bummer, sucks to be you, DH, you can't win. Solve it with a conduit that interacts with the Hunt and makes it more AoE friendly at the cost of some of its single target power. So let's say there's a conduit with the tooltip, charging an enemy using the Hunt now inflicts 250% attack power, nature damage to all enemies within 5 yards and rooting them in place for 3 seconds, but targets are no longer marked for extra damage and the ability's teleport is disabled. It's not a buff to the ability, but a change to how you can use it. It allows you to diversify what the ability is good at. And let's say you put the conduit in your Dreamweaver tree, and the Dreamweaver becomes your Soulbind you use when you want to do AoE, while the other 2 Soulbinds you can choose from don't have this Covenant ability changing conduit in their tree, so the Hunt remains in its awesome single target state there. Likewise, you could have a conduit that affects the Kyrion Demon Hunter ability to make it much more single target at the cost of its AoE. So maybe it changes the ability so the brand can only damage 1 target, but it hits for 480% of attack power instead. By making conduits that are designed solely to interact with specific Covenant abilities and change their area of use, you get the best of all worlds. It means that players have the freedom to choose their Covenant because of the aesthetics and less regard for the Covenant ability, because the Covenant ability can be altered in subtle ways using conduits and Soulbinds. But it also means a player can choose a Covenant because they think it gives them, for example, the best single target raid throughput without worrying that it leaves them stuck with a useless ability for AoE and Mythic Plus, because it can be altered to make it more AoE friendly using conduits and Soulbinds. For me, it's a simple and elegant solution to the problem, which allows Covenants and Covenant abilities to remain in the form that Blizzard originally conceptualized, but also gives players the agency and means to ensure that however they choose their Covenant, there needn't be a wrong choice. And that, my friends, is the most important part of all. So what do you guys think? Do you think Covenant abilities will end up as a worst case or best case scenario when Shadowlands launches? And what do you think of my idea of using Soulbind conduits as a way of mitigating those rather obvious pitfalls? I'd genuinely love to hear your opinions on this, so let us know in the comments below. And thanks for joining us today. If you like this video, don't thank us, thank our patrons who give their actual real life money to make all of our work possible. Guys, thank you so much, because without you, there would be a whole lot less Taliesin and Evitel. If you didn't like it, downvote the shit out of it. Remember, my name is Steve Danusa. No, my name is Taliesin from me and Evitel, and an Iron too. Until next time, cheerio.